They say a picture-perfect family can hide the darkest secrets, and for the Foster family, that saying would become a chilling reality. Around 4 o'clock in the morning on August 26, 2008, Shropshire's Central Fire Control received an emergency call reporting a fire at the Grand Osbaston mansion. When firefighters arrived, they were blocked by a large horse trailer parked at the entrance, and that delay cost precious time. By the time they made it inside, the entire house had been swallowed by flames. Tragically, so had the people who lived there: Christopher Foster, his wife Jill, and their teenage daughter Kirsty.
A millionaire and his family are missing after their country estate was burned down in an arson attack.
Bloody hell, it's really on fire, isn't it?
But there's still no sign of the owners, Christopher and Gillian Foster, or their teenage daughter, Kirsty.
As investigators began digging into the case, they discovered that the horse trailer had been deliberately placed to keep emergency services out. This was no accident. Something far more sinister had unfolded behind the mansion's locked gates. But who would do such a thing to a family everyone believed was so perfect? Shockingly, the answer pointed straight to the man who built the dream life himself, Christopher Foster, the same man who worked his way to millionaire status, who created the illusion of success, comfort, and control. And yet, behind that flawless image was a man hiding pressure, fear, and darkness no one saw coming. From the beginning, Christopher seemed destined to achieve big things. His mother, Enid, always described him as a natural go-getter, someone who was always chasing opportunities, even as a child. He wasn't the only one in the family with big dreams. He and his younger brother, Andrew, both shared a desire to become successful businessmen, following in the footsteps of their late father, who had been a sales director. But while their ambitions aligned, their personalities clashed. Chris was confident and commanding, someone who always took center stage. Andrew, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved, often left in his brother's shadow. Their relationship had always been strained. Andrew would later reveal how difficult it was growing up beside someone who always seemed to outshine him. And yet, despite their differences, both brothers remained close to their mother. Enid adored them both, though it was no secret she had a special soft spot for Chris. In 1987, Chris married Jill, a gentle and supportive woman who later became a full-time housewife. 6 years later, in 1993, they had their only child, Kirsty. She grew up surrounded by comfort, wealth, and animals, especially horses. Kirsty was known to be kind and soft-spoken, and she had a passion for riding. Her world seemed as beautiful and untouchable as the one her parents had carefully built. But Christopher's journey to wealth wasn't always glamorous. In the late 1980s, he worked humble jobs, selling mattresses and using pizza boxes as makeshift insulation. Life was ordinary until one tragic news report caught his attention and changed everything. On July 6, 1988, the Piper Alpha oil rig exploded in the North Sea. The blaze lasted for days, killing 167 workers. It was one of the worst offshore disasters in history. However, Chris didn't just see a tragedy. He saw a business opportunity. He realized there was a massive gap in the market for fire-resistant insulation materials for oil and gas rigs. Acting quickly, he began developing a product that could withstand extreme heat. He called it Ulva Shield. But in order to prove it worked, he had to take a huge risk. He mortgaged his home for £5,000 to fund a live demonstration. The risk paid off. Ulva Shield outperformed every competitor, surviving fire tests while others burned to ash. It even earned a rare A1 fire safety rating. Suddenly, Chris was in demand. Oil companies placed orders, and his small business exploded in success. Practically overnight, Christopher Foster went from selling pizza box insulation to becoming a self-made millionaire. And with success came the spending. That same year, after a casual shopping trip, Jill came across a house in a local magazine that caught her eye. It wasn't just any home, it was Osbaston House, an elegant 16-acre estate in the peaceful village of Massacre, Shropshire. Complete with a private lake, horse paddocks, and lush greenery, it looked like something out of a storybook. Now, despite the staggering asking price of around £1.5 million, the mansion was far from perfect. It still required significant renovations and updates, but Jill Foster was completely smitten. The grand 16-acre estate offered privacy, elegance, and space for the luxurious lifestyle she and Chris were building. The moment Jill laid eyes on the property in the Shropshire Life magazine, she was enchanted. By the next morning, Chris didn't hesitate. He made an offer. The Fosters sold their current home, packed up their lives, and relocated to what would become their ultimate dream estate. As soon as they moved in, Chris began spending lavishly. He poured an additional £50,000 into landscaping and installing a brand new swimming pool to match the grandeur of their new home. But the spending didn't stop there. Chris indulged in an extravagant lifestyle that many could only imagine. He bought 2 sleek Porsches, one for himself and one for Jill, a stylish James Bond-like Aston Martin, multiple Range Rovers, a tractor for the estate, and various other high-end vehicles that lined their driveway like trophies. Their daughter, Kirsty, was sent to an elite private boarding school where she was given every possible advantage. Chris also bought her several horses to support her love for riding. Kirsty adored animals and spent her weekends riding and entering competitions. Friends described her as gentle, soft-spoken, and kind, a contrast to the luxury that surrounded her. Alongside her horses, the family also owned 4 dogs and even a collection of doves, adding to the estate's almost fairy tale appearance. To elevate their lifestyle even further, the Fosters hired a full-time housekeeper and a personal assistant. Inside the mansion, every room glistened with opulence, decorated with over £200,000 worth of antique furnishings, hand-picked to match the couple's expensive taste. Chris's obsession with wealth and image extended beyond furniture and cars, however. His most costly passion was shooting. He owned an impressive collection of high-end firearms, some valued between £12,000 and £12,500, nearly $20,000 at the time. He regularly hosted weekend-long clay pigeon shooting parties on the estate, some of which racked up bills of up to £8,000. But Chris's behavior wasn't just excessive, it was often unsettling. He had a habit of leaving his loaded guns around the house carelessly. When the family's doves left droppings on his vehicles, he would simply shoot them on sight, much to Jill's horror. In one particularly disturbing moment, Kirsty's black Labrador chased after a flock of sheep and couldn't be controlled. Chris took the dog for a walk down a country lane and shot it in the head. Though Chris appeared to be a thriving entrepreneur, those close to him noticed he lacked long-term vision. He was described as impulsive, obsessed with instant gratification, and quick to cut ties with anyone who disappointed or challenged him. He wasn't driven by purpose, he was driven by appearances. Social status meant everything to Chris. Over time, both he and Jill began climbing into higher and higher social circles. Chris became fixated on leaving his Wolverhampton roots behind, as though his past no longer fit into the glossy life he had curated. Jill, too, embraced their new life with ease. She spent her days going on shopping sprees, booking nail and hair appointments, and indulging in beauty treatments like Botox and manicures. The couple, along with their daughter and close friends, often went on luxurious holidays, staying in 5-star hotels, dining at the most expensive restaurants, and spending up to £20,000 per trip. These were not rare occasions. They were the norm. Chris never hesitated to throw money at pleasure. But behind the glamour, A darker truth was festering. Unbeknownst to most of those around him, Chris was in deep financial trouble. His outwardly perfect life was being funded by unsustainable borrowing, secret deals, and silent desperation. Back in 2003, Chris had signed an exclusive contract with a company called DRC, giving them sole rights to manufacture and sell the oil rig sealant he had invented, UltraShield. At first, this deal looked like a smart move. By 2004, his net worth had soared to over £10 million, but everything unraveled quickly. In 2005, just 1 year later, Chris found himself drowning in debt over £2.8 million. Rather than scale back or cut his losses, he did the opposite. Addicted to his lifestyle, he tried to dig his way out by making riskier financial moves. Despite his exclusive agreement with DRC, he secretly signed a second deal with another company for the sale of his product. When DRC found out, they sued him for breach of contract. The court ruled against him, stripping him of his patent. DRC then turned UltraShield into a global success without him. Chris, now facing financial ruin, watched as his company went into liquidation in 2007. £3 million worth of his assets were frozen. His salary stopped. His financial empire had collapsed. But instead of changing course, Chris continued spending like nothing had happened. At the same time, he found himself in a bitter dispute with his accountant, who reported him to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. Chris had failed to pay VAT, national insurance, and a slew of other taxes. In a last-ditch effort to stay afloat, he borrowed heavily from banks, remortgaged the Osbaston mansion not once but 3 times, and overdrew more than 20 separate bank accounts. Still, he kept the mask on. Even as the walls closed in, Chris continued to host shooting events, drive his luxury cars, and maintain appearances. Those who knew Jill were unsure if she truly understood how dire their situation was. Perhaps Chris had shielded her from the worst of it, or maybe she just didn't want to believe it. Either way, she never seemed to cut back on spending, and she never confided in friends about any financial worries. On the outside, the Fosters looked just as polished and powerful as ever, and as the walls of his carefully built world began to close in, Christopher Foster found himself caught in a storm of financial ruin, personal despair, and unbearable pressure. The once self-made millionaire, who had built a life of luxury from nothing but ambition and risk, was now staring down a future where all of it could be stripped away. The illusion of control that he had fought so hard to maintain was slipping, and Chris knew it. Additionally, conversations with close friends revealed glimpses of the turmoil brewing inside him. When the subject of property came up, Chris made a chilling, offhand remark. He said he would never give up Osbaston House unless it was in a body bag. While others might have dismissed it as a dramatic joke, the tone in his voice was far too serious to ignore. He also told those close to him that he couldn't bear the thought of watching his family suffer, to see Jill and Kirsty stripped of the comfort, status, and lifestyle they had grown so used to. He made it clear, if it came down to losing them or losing everything else, he would rather not be around to witness it at all. In his own twisted way, he believed that taking control of the ending would be better than watching the downfall unfold piece by piece. Behind the scenes, Chris had started seeking professional help. The stress had become too much to hide. On multiple occasions, he visited his doctor and admitted that he was struggling with depression. He even confided that he was having self-harm thoughts, dark, heavy emotions that refused to be shaken off. He was prescribed antidepressants, but tragically, his pleas weren't taken as seriously as they should have been. His downward spiral continued unchecked, wrapped in silence, pride, and shame. Then came the moment that would push him over the edge. In the week leading up to the August bank holiday of 2008, a letter arrived. Quiet, official, and devastating. It was from Birmingham and Five Counties Finance, the financial company that had been managing the legal seizure of assets due to Chris's mountain of unpaid debts. The letter had been posted right on the front gate of the Osbaston estate in plain view. It stated that representatives would be returning the following Tuesday to reclaim the house and everything in it. This news hit like a death sentence. The housekeeper recalled showing Chris the letter. He looked at it confused, as if trying to process what it meant, but said nothing. His silence was telling. This wasn't just a financial setback, it was confirmation that the fantasy was finally collapsing, and it was no longer something he could outrun or cover up. The life he had crafted down to the last antique vase and polished sports car was going to be taken away, publicly. For a man like Christopher Foster, who had spent his entire adult life obsessed with image, status, and material success, the idea of losing everything and having others see him lose it was unbearable. His reputation, his pride, and the illusion of power he projected were all tied to this life. Without it, who was he? More importantly, what would happen to his wife and daughter? On the morning of August 21st, 2008, a close friend reached out to Christopher Foster via text. Sensing that something might be off, they asked the kind of casual question friends often ask without expecting a heavy answer. "How are you doing?" Chris replied with just 6 words, but those 6 words said everything. Not good. Things are coming to a head for me soon. It was cryptic, dark, and carried a quiet sense of finality. But the friend had no idea what was truly brewing beneath the surface. They didn't know that Chris was standing at the edge of a terrifying decision, and that this would be the last time they'd hear even a hint of what was coming. Just 4 days later, on August 25th, the Foster family received an invitation to a seemingly harmless event, a barbecue and clay pigeon shooting gathering hosted by friends. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. Chris, his 49-year-old wife Jill, and their 15-year-old daughter Kirsty accepted the invitation and attended as if everything in their lives was perfectly fine. The 3 of them showed up smiling, laughing, and enjoying themselves, with no visible signs of worry. Chris, in particular, appeared calm and cheerful, his usual charming self. No one suspected a thing. Witnesses later said he was his usual Chris, chatting, joking, and sipping drinks like nothing was wrong. There's even a photo from that event, captured just hours before the horror, that shows the family posing together, radiating warmth and joy. But while the image painted a scene of togetherness and peace, behind Chris's smile was something far darker, something deeply broken. The truth was, he had already made a decision. He just hadn't told anyone. In the days leading up to that fateful evening, Chris had been quietly preparing. He had spent hours online reading self-harm websites, scouring them for methods and information. He had revisited old photo albums, poring over family memories, holidays, birthdays, laughter frozen in time. Those photos weren't just nostalgia, they were his private farewell, a final glance at the life he had built and the people he believed he had failed. In his mind, he wasn't just protecting them, he was preparing to erase them from a future he no longer believed they could survive. After a few hours at the barbecue, Chris turned to Jill and said he was ready to leave. He had had enough of the party. Jill initially wanted to stay a little longer, but eventually agreed. At exactly 8:44 in the evening, the family returned home, captured clearly on their own CCTV cameras. That moment, frozen in grainy footage, marked the last time the Foster family would ever be seen together. Later that night, Jill went up to bed around 11:30. Chris, composed and eerily calm, went to check on Kirsty, who was still awake, texting a friend. At midnight, he disconnected the internet, forcing Kirsty to end her conversation and go to sleep. The house, grand and quiet, fell into darkness, but Chris stayed awake. The plan was already in motion. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Chris picked up one of his firearms, a silenced gun, and walked quietly into the bedroom where his wife was sleeping peacefully. Without hesitation or remorse, he shot her once in the back of the head. She never stirred. She never had a chance to wake up. From there, he moved to his daughter's bedroom. Kirsty was already asleep. Her fate was just as swift and silent. One shot to the head. 2 lives gone in seconds. But it didn't end there. With chilling precision, Chris took one of his shotguns and went outside. His next victims were the family's dogs, 4 beloved companions who had lived alongside the family on the estate. One by one, he approached the kennels and shot each dog in the head. Then he walked to the barn, where the horses, Kirsty's prized, cherished animals, were kept. Horses she rode, trained, and loved. He shot them too, every single one. Afterward, he set the barn ablaze with the animals still inside. Surveillance footage would later show him moving through the darkness like a man possessed. Robotic, mechanical, empty. There was no hesitation, no visible emotion, just silence and fire. Knowing that the fire department would respond quickly, Chris had one more act of sabotage. He got into a large horse trailer, drove it to the front entrance of the estate, and parked it directly in the path of emergency access. To ensure no one could move it, he pulled out his gun and shot the tires, deliberately flattening them. He wanted to slow them down. He wanted to make sure the fire had enough time to do what he needed it to do: destroy everything. In the final stage of his deadly plan, Christopher Foster became disturbingly methodical. Armed with his knowledge of fire behavior and destruction, he took calculated steps to ensure total annihilation. He strategically connected hose pipes to his domestic oil tank and began pumping approximately 200 liters of fuel into the cellar of the Osbaston house. This was no impulsive act. It was a firebomb in the making. Chris knew exactly what he was doing, and more chillingly, why. His mindset was clear. If he could no longer keep his wealth and lifestyle, then no one else should have it either. Not the creditors, not the banks, not even the memories. After soaking the cellar and parts of the house with oil, he extended the destruction to the very symbols of his wealth, his luxury cars and prized possessions, dousing them in flammable liquid. Then he struck the match. Within moments, flames roared through the estate like a monster unleashed. The fire tore through walls, devoured ceilings, and spread with terrifying speed. Still armed with a rifle, Chris returned to the bedroom where Jill's lifeless body lay, and in a final, eerie act of twisted devotion, he lay beside her. As the fire closed in, Chris wrapped his arms around his deceased wife. Some believe he may have intended to burn alive as a form of punishment, or maybe as a final gesture of ownership. One last display of control. Christopher's estranged brother, Andrew Foster, later speculated that Chris had no intention of surviving, and he was right. Autopsy results showed that Chris died from smoke inhalation. There were no gunshot wounds, no evidence of struggle, just Chris, Jill, and the inferno that consumed everything they once were. At exactly 4:11 in the morning, the family's home security system stopped recording. That was when a neighbor, awakened by the eerie glow in the sky and the crackling roar of fire, called emergency services. Firefighters responded quickly, but their path was blocked. The same horse trailer Chris had used to obstruct the entrance now stood in their way, with its tires shot out. By the time they forced their way through, it was too late. The fire had already taken over, raging too fiercely to be contained. As firefighters battled the blaze, horrified neighbors stood by helplessly. Many feared the worst, whispering about the Fosters who were nowhere to be found. The next day, newspapers and news stations issued desperate appeals for the family's whereabouts. Some speculated they had been abducted. Others held out hope that they had escaped and were hiding. At that point, the bodies hadn't been recovered. The truth had not yet surfaced. For 3 full days, emergency crews worked to control the fire and allow investigators to safely enter the ruins. When they finally did, what they found would haunt them. Jill and Christopher's remains were discovered intertwined on what was left of the bed, buried under the rubble that had collapsed into the living room. But Kirsty's body was missing. There was still a flicker of hope that she had survived. That hope was crushed a few days later when fragments of Kirsty's remains were found amid the charred wreckage. Investigators worked with delicate brushes, treating the debris like an archaeological site, gathering every piece they could. Among those remains, a portion of Kirsty's skull revealed the painful truth. She had been shot in the head, just like her mother. The entire family had been killed before the fire even began. With the bodies identified, suspicion turned squarely toward Christopher. The recovery of security footage confirmed it. Chris had carried out each murder, each shot, each calculated step of the massacre. He left behind no last note, no apology, no explanation. But the evidence was undeniable. Investigators also opened a financial investigation, and the truth about Chris's life began to unravel fast. Despite his image as a wealthy businessman, Chris had been hiding an avalanche of debt. By the time of the murders, his liabilities had ballooned to over £4 million. Creditors were closing in, prepared to seize everything: the house, the vehicles, even the smallest assets. But Chris had already taken care of that. He left nothing for them to claim, only ashes. As more details emerged, theories flooded in. Some believed that Chris had snapped from the shame of financial failure, that he couldn't bear the public downfall. Others saw it as a monstrous act of control, by a man who would rather obliterate everything than admit defeat. His mother, Enid, was heartbroken. She refused to believe her son could be capable of such cruelty. In her eyes, he did it out of love, to protect his family from the humiliation of losing everything. But Andrew, his brother, saw things differently. The two had not spoken for 16 years. There were times Andrew had considered visiting, if only for the sake of their mother, but fear always stopped him. Their childhood had been filled with tension and trauma. Andrew alleged that Chris was a bully, a control freak, and had even assaulted him during their youth. In 1999, Andrew had written Chris a letter trying to reconcile. Chris's reply was chilling. He demanded a written apology, telling Andrew that he needed to beg and scrape on bended knee to be allowed back into his and Jill's life. The history between the brothers painted a stark portrait of a man consumed by pride, control, and vengeance. 4 months after the tragedy, on December 19, 2008, a joint funeral was held for 15-year-old Kirsty and 49-year-old Jill at their local village church. It was quiet, intimate, and attended only by close friends and family. As per Jill's family's wishes, both were laid to rest together in the same burial plot. Christopher Foster was buried separately in another location, alone and far from the wife and daughter he claimed to love. In the years following the Osbaston house tragedy, the ruins of the estate remained untouched. Charred furniture, melted debris, and even small remnants of the Fosters' life, like Kirsty's first aid manual for her horses and a handwritten meal plan, still lay scattered across the ground like ghosts of what once was. The 16-acre estate was finally cleared in 2011. In 2012, it was put up for sale but failed to find a buyer. It wasn't until 2014 that Kevin Gorski stepped in and purchased the land for a cut price of £400,000, with hopes of giving the property a new beginning and helping the community heal from the horror that once stood there Gorski invested £1 million into building his dream home. But instead of renewal, he found ruin. Now, Gorski claims the house he built is a death trap. He says the structure is so unstable that heavy 60-kilogram stone slabs and massive cornerstones could collapse at any moment, likening the danger to a giant Jenga tower on the verge of toppling. 2 stones have already fallen, and Gorski fears someone could be killed if emergency repairs aren't made soon. Worse, he says he's already electrocuted himself while living in the house and now faces a staggering £350,000 repair bill. He's taken legal action against the builder, who he claims refuses to accept responsibility, blaming everything from the warm sun to the architects and inspectors. Gorski, who used compensation money from a near-fatal motorbike crash in 2008 to fund the build, says he's out of funds and out of options. "It's like this place has a past that doesn't want to let me escape from," he said. "What was meant to be a symbol of healing now feels like a haunting reminder of a tragedy that refuses to stay buried." Now, I want to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you believe Christopher Foster acted out of love, so desperate to shield his family from a life of poverty that he saw no other way out? Or was he simply a narcissist, so obsessed with control and appearances that he couldn't bear the thought of losing everything, even if it meant taking the people he claimed to love down with him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.